Well, greetings. I'm Fred Plotkin, so this must be Fred Plotkin on Fridays. It is February 12th of 2021, and I am joining you from New York, where it is 2 p.m., which would make it 8 p.m. in Lucca, Italy, and 4 a.m. in Nagasaki, Japan, just to name a couple of places. I'm always happy to have inspiring guests who, in this case today, happen to be wonderful people, in addition to inspiring guests who join me. My guest today is Claudia Catania. I say Claudia, not Claudia, the way we might say in America, but I say Claudia Catania, mezzo-soprano, wonderful teacher as well. And I want to think of you as a guiding spirit in the music community here, as someone who inspires others and is a conservator of memory and of how to do the right thing in the right way, if I could describe you that way. So, Claudia, welcome. Benvenuto.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I have a question for you, Claudia, right away. Do you know why I invited you specifically today, February 12th, 2021?
Perhaps because tomorrow night the Trojans is being telecast. Is that a
No, I
possibility?
didn't. I invited you well before I knew that.
I thought that. I have no idea except that you're a very nice man and we like each other on Facebook a lot.
We do, but it happens that I picked today for a reason and not because it was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. 40 years ago tonight, you made your Metropolitan Opera debut.
Oh, I have my tissues here because this is going to be a little. Oh my heavens!
And I keep track of such things. Not
I
everyone
do
does,
not, obviously.
but I do. And that's why you are here today. Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
You were the second lady in Mozart's Die Zauberflöte, the Magic Flute,
Yes.
in a cast that included the other two ladies, Loretta Di Franco, who we love, and Batya Godfrey Ben David. You also had Lucia Pop, as I recall, and John McCurdy,
Yes.
Donald McIntyre as the speaker. Wonderful, wonderful artists of that era. Now, what struck me, I knew that this was the anniversary, is I decided to look at what Claudia Catania did in 1981 at the Met, having begun in February of that year. She appeared in 9 different operas in a space of about 10 months, 10 and a half months. First, the second lady in the Magic Flute in Die Zauberflöte, then as a page in Salome, with Gwyneth Jones as Salome, Richard Castley, Mignon Dunn. Then as an animal in Ravel's L'Enfant et le Sortilège, conducted by Manuel Rosenthal. Then as a girl in The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahagoni, starring Ariel Bybee as Jenny and James Levine conducting. Then as a solo madrigalist in Manon Lescaut, with Renata Scotto, Hermano Mauro, and James Levine conducting. Then as Velgunda in Das Rheingold, with Donald McIntyre as Wotan and Eva Rondova as Fricka, Eric Leinsdorf conducting. Then as the so-called unborn, one of the unborn children in Strauss's Die Frauen Schatten, with Birgit Nielsen, Eva Martone, Eric Leinsdorf. I remember that night, every moment of it. The theater was rattling with ovations. And Nielsen and Martone, I think Martone is the only person I've ever heard, maybe Gwyneth Jones, but in a different way, whose voice reaches and hits you in the theater the way Nielsen's did.
Yes.
Nielsen's was unique, but Martone came very, very close, and Gwyneth Jones also. Then a few days later, you were the nurse in Suor Angelica with Renata Scotto and James Levine conducting.
Yes.
And then you were a cook in Le Rossignol by Stravinsky with Gwendolyn Bradley and Natalia Makarova, both playing the Nightingale, one as a singer, one as a dancer, with James Levine conducting. That is a hugely eclectic arrangement of roles, all small because you were a new artist and so on, but it required remarkable memory in these different languages and characters and styles, remarkable versatility, and you had the youth and the energy to get you through that. But explain what the Metropolitan Opera was like in that time, that you were able to do 9 roles in 9 different operas and go from one rehearsal to the next. And how did it all come together?
We had a lot of help. We had great coaching. We had very supportive, everyone was supportive of each other. When you asked me to come today, I thought about what a family we were then. And, uh, and I did have tremendous energy. That was the key to getting me through a lot of this. I remember one time I had a rehearsal that was like an all-day rehearsal, and I had a performance at night. And I was sitting next to John Alexander, and I said, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Do I mark? Do I? And I was a kid, and I remember him saying, "You do it all. Just do it all."
So explain what marking is, please. Not everyone knows.
Marking is singing half voice, not singing really on your voice, so that you save yourself. And sometimes you don't save yourself because it makes you strangle instead. But he said, just do it all, just do it. And I learned from the people who were really great. It was the last of the golden age of singers. When you walked down the hall, you passed Sutherland or Birgit Nilsson. Uh, uh, I got to sing with Pavarotti and with Domingo. It was really an incredible time. But also, I have to tell you that the way it all happened, I'm going to say a lot of names to you, was because of Gene Kraft. And I came
Mezzo
to the Met,
soprano, wonderful character mezzo soprano.
and a wonderful person. I came to the Met to cover 3 of the roles in Lulu, and she was in Lulu as well. We had just done it together in Santa Fe, and she was supposed to do the page in Salome, but she had just sung Herodias, and she didn't want to sing the page. And she said to me, "What are you doing when this is over?" And I said, "Well, I'm going out back into life and looking for work." And she went to the administration and she asked them to give me the page in Salome. And because of Jean, I had a debut. Then Ariel, who was a beloved friend and a great colleague and a wonderful singer, got carpal tunnel syndrome and had to have surgery.
Yeah.
And then I got a
Ariel
call,
Bybee.
Ariel Bybee. I got a call from the administration saying, if you can learn Second Lady in a week, that can be your debut. Well, I had sung Third Lady and in English, and I just knew I could do this. I could do Second Lady in German, and I did. And that became my debut. And then I got a call from the administration saying, Maestro Levine won't give you anything else until he hears you. And I had never sung for Jimmy. I had never had any kind of an audition. So my trajectory at the Met was an odd one. And then, of course, I did sing for Jimmy, and he blessed me with many things there. Yeah. So, yes.
Let's remember, because I think it's important to do that. Let's remember Ariel Bybee,
Oh, my.
because
What a
she's not a
great.
remembered figure, but she deserves to be a remembered figure. You start, and then I'll chime in.
Just that she was a beautiful woman, a
Yes.
gracious woman, a great colleague, a wonderful voice, who sang Flora with Sutherland and then who sang the lead in Mahagoni. She was just such a kind colleague. When you leave the Met, it's not as glorious as when you come there. And I remember my last performance at the Met, and the person, and we were all there. I think it was Frau Schatten. We were
He
all there
was.
in the dressing rooms, and Lily Chukazian said to me, "Did anyone say goodbye to you?" And I said, "Yes, Ariel Bybee." So that's how I remember Ariel.
I was very fond of Ariel Bybee. As you said, yes, she was an unmistakably beautiful woman. That was the first
Oh,
thing that you
oh,
couldn't help but notice. Ariel was, I think, the first opera singer I ever knew or worked with who was a Mormon, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that religion, I'm not here to talk about one religion or another, uh, certainly would not condone the behavior of a lot of opera characters. And I asked her, how do you square the fact that you personally would not condone or do what a lot of these characters do, certainly Jenny and Mahagoni, but even Flora and La Traviata.
mhm.
Flora, let's not pretend, probably was a prostitute, is a madam, all of that. And she said to me, I serve the music, and the music is from God. And I understand that I'm playing characters, but my job is to serve the music. And I would say that as Jenny, she was a very, I don't want to characterize, but ladylike Jenny. She
Yes,
was not a woman of the streets, so to
right.
speak.
Yes.
And Ariel brought her dignity, her beauty, her convictions, but she never let her convictions get in the way of her performances. Again, I don't talk people's personal religion that much, but I've known people in opera who were quite religious, whatever religion they were in, who objected to the character, to the behavior of some of the characters they played, and either wouldn't do it. I've known a couple of people with very fine voices who walked away from the profession because they just could not accept having to portray these kinds of behaviors, which I mean, we've seen a lot worse in our public life here in the United States by certain elected public officials.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
but nonetheless, they get away with it. But for these very religious opera singers, they couldn't tolerate that. I mean, one who did do a lot of roles was John Vickers, was a very religious man.
I was
Um,
thinking Jerome Heinz as well.
Jerome Heinz as well, a very good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And John Vickers, you know, he said, I won't sing to me. He said, I won't sing Tannhäuser. He's a heathen. He's a sinner. And I said, well, you sang Sigmund, who has sex with his sister and produces a child. He said, well, the music was better. And yeah, Jerome Heinz, who you worked with,
I did it.
um, and talk about Jerome Heinz. He's another very important figure.
I was doing my first Maddalena at the Met, and
Rigoletto.
yes, and we were and he was Sparafugile, and we were rehearsing, and and we were talking around the set, and it was a small, difficult kind of set, and I said, "This is my first one," and he said, "Don't worry, I'm right there with you. This is my 25th." And it was very sweet. He was wonderful. He was a wonderful colleague, just a wonderful colleague.
He was very tall.
Yes.
He had a very beautiful wife.
Yes.
He was exceedingly religious
Yes.
and would occasionally come to my office door at the Met to, as he called it, spread the word. And I said to him, Jerome, I fully respect you. I admire you as an artist, and I respect your right to practice your religion as you wish. But I don't bring my religion to my work. And you can if you wish, but I really don't. There's no way that I could work with people if we had differences that way. And I don't want to do that. And he said, well, will you accept my blessing? And I said, of course. You want to be blessed by Jerome Heinz, but that was it. It's such an interesting thing, opera and religion. I hadn't planned to go there with you, but here we are. Um, because Jerome Heinz, for example, played the Grand Inquisitor in Don Carlo, who is a hugely powerful figure, but also, frankly, a very corrupt figure. And religion, I can think of La Juive, there's a cardinal. There are many religious figures there in Tosca. There's a sacristan who's sort of a charming figure who may drink a bit. Um, they cover the whole range of religion. And I always see composers and librettists who create these roles not necessarily as advocates or opponents to religion, but including these characters as part of bigger life. Certainly in the Russian operas and Boris Godunov and Kovanchina, there's a great deal of religion.
Yes.
And did I don't need to ask your religious beliefs, but did you, in approaching roles and performances and productions, think about those characters in terms of their belief system?
Well, I certainly thought about Suzuki in terms
Mm.
of the Asian culture and it being very different than our culture. You know, you and I can get angry with each other and say, "I'll kill you," but they mean it.
Mm.
And I remember that Renata Scotto studied with I think I'm right with a Japanese man. I studied with Keiko Nakamura, who was a retired geisha, and we really understood that. So I remember that distinctly. It was an entirely different mindset on stage with her. When she said, "I will kill you," I believed her. You know,
But
I also
also,
no.
yeah,
Tell me. Well,
it's important with Madame Butterfly, with the opera Madame Butterfly, to remember that Cho San has converted to Christianity,
yes,
whereas Suzuki remains in their Japanese religious
yes,
system.
yes,
And therefore, Cho San has made a very bold and perhaps misguided step by leaving her religion because, in effect, she's turning her back on her whole society to
yeah,
become, quote, an American woman.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Though tragically, the man she married does not see her that way.
Right, right,
And before we leave, you were talking about Rigoletto. I want to stay with Rigoletto for a couple of reasons, but primarily because your Gilda was Benita Valente. And one time I ran into both you and Benita at a performance in Philadelphia,
oh my, yes.
and you saw me turn into, I'm getting goosebumps now as I say this, what we call in America a fanboy
Yes,
for
yes,
Benita Valente, who had
yes,
always been one of my biggest crushes. And although I knew her ever so slightly at the Met, I didn't really have any opportunity to work with her, but always was crazy about her. So now you can tell the audience from your point of view how I behaved.
no, I found you. You told me later how you felt, but I found you very composed. And she is such a down to earth, wonderful, lovely person. She is not what you would think of when you think, oh, a diva. Not at all. And I'll tell you, Benita and I are very close friends. We spend a lot of time together in Italy. Laughing, and a lot of time together singing at the Met. Also, I guess we did a Bach Magnificat with Kubelik, a number of things. And I then, after knowing her, I listened to Shepherd on the Rock, which she recorded when she was 25 years old with Rudolf Serkin. And it was so stellar. And I said to her, you know, if I had heard this first, I never would have been able to know you. And so I kind of felt, in my way, like you.
Well, I got to tell you, musically, absolutely, but not just musically,
Yeah, yeah.
everything.
And she's so much fun and funny.
Now
And
you tell me.
uh, I'm sure she's in Philadelphia. I'm sure we'll see each other again. Oh,
um, the purity of her singing.
yes,
Notice I said singing and not voice. The voice is gorgeous, but the
yes,
purity of her singing, the faithfulness to the notes, but not a slavish faithfulness to the
yes,
note.
yes.
Shepherd on the Rock is a beautiful example. But when did you first meet her, and how did you form your friendship as opposed to your working
I
relationship?
first met her at the Met. I was also blessed at that time, as I am today, to have Marlena Malas as my teacher. And she and Marlena went to Curtis together. So that friendship was fostered by the two of them. And we did. I'm trying to think if we did anything else. I don't think so. The magic flute. But then, when I went to teach in Italy for the University of Cincinnati, we brought her for a summer, for a couple summers, and then I really got to know her
Mm.
daily, on a daily basis. Traveled together, hotels together, um, and that's how I. Oh, and her husband, Tony Cecchia, was in the administration of the Curtis Institute of Music when I was there, and took such careful care of everybody. He took such good care of me, and I had no idea of the connection until after I knew her. But that's how I know Bonita.
Claudia, would you? I can't say who it is yet, but I'm going to have a very important figure from Curtis join me in the near future. And would you talk about the Curtis Institute of Music? Because for people who don't know, it sometimes gets lost in the shuffle when we talk about Juilliard in Indiana and a few other places. But Curtis is right there
It's the
with
only
those
place I
institutions.
ever wanted to go to school. Madame Euphemia Gregory taught there. She had taught Anna Moffo, who was my hero, and Frank Guerrera and Judith Blagan. And it was a small group of singers. It was really an instrumental school with this small group of singers. I don't know Curtis today, but this is in my day. Uh, um, it was so refined. It was so elegant in the way it presented music to you. It's how I learned to be a musician. Uh, they would call you and say, would it be convenient for you to have a coaching at such and such a time? They had tea every Wednesday afternoon, served so beautifully. They gave me a piano for my apartment.
Uh,
It was the most elegant of the places to go to school. That being said, I didn't get into Curtis. I auditioned as a senior in high school, and I didn't get in. I
mm.
wasn't good enough then, and I was too young, and I didn't get in. So I went to Temple University, where I got a great education. By the time I went to Curtis, things had changed a little bit. Martial Sanger was no longer there, so they didn't have an opera department. I didn't study with Madame Gregory. I studied with Richard Lewis, who was a wonderful coach and maybe not a teacher. And I realized that I wasn't learning how to sing. So I only stayed at Curtis a year and I left,
Mm.
much to the sorrow of my parents. And I came to New York, where I did learn my craft. So it was that's the convoluted Curtis story for me. But it was such an elegant, wonderful place.
If it's any consolation, Giuseppe Verdi was rejected from the Milan Conservatory, so you're in good company.
I feel better. I feel better.
Um,
Vladimir Sokolov was a coach there, and I learned most of my repertoire with
yeah.
Vladimir Sokolov, but I wasn't learning how to sing, and I had a passion for the making of the sound, so I had to get out of there.
So you made, in passing, I think, a phenomenally important point that I want to go deep with you on. The difference between a teacher and a coach. What is that?
Well, a t- my opinion is a teacher teaches you technically how to operate the instrument. It's a journey. Marlena says it takes 20 years. I think she's right. Uh, so that you the voice eventually responds to what you want it to do. A coach for me is the style of the music, and the way the music is interpreted, maybe the dramatic interpretation. When I studied music, uh, there were a few coaches. and they were great. Now it's a problem because anybody who plays piano for a voice teacher then gets a little bit of knowledge and then becomes a coach too soon. Not that they're not good, but maybe too soon. I had three that were remarkable coaches. One is Bliss Hebert, who I'm still in touch with, who is an opera director, who was a wonderful, wonderful coach. One is David Stivender,
Hmm.
who was all about the music. These men were
And chorus
all
master of the Met.
and chorus master of the Met, all about the music. And the third one was Joan Dornaman, who at that point was a coach and a prompter at the Met, all about the music. And that was it.
Mm.
And I didn't go from coach to coach to coach to coach. And I had from 1980 on one teacher, and that's Marlena. And she taught me to sing, and she taught me to teach. And now she also teaches me to live. So,
How did she teach you how to teach? What's involved in that?
uh, um, I would sit outside her door in Chautauqua, where she has a summer program, and I would listen to her teach. And I would listen to her find the problem in the voice and then find an exercise that would resolve that problem. And then, of course, because of her personality, and the person would come back. So, a lot, she says, what's involved in teaching is repetition. I think it's also that the singer has to be willing to do the repetition. You know, it's a tough road now, Fred, because there are so many singers. When I was starting, there weren't that many. We had a lot of opportunity. Now there are so many singers, and there's a desperation to do it and to become good quick, to become famous and successful quickly. Well, it doesn't happen that way. The voice doesn't respond that way. So my thought about Marlena is she makes people willing to take the journey with her, and that's really important. I went to her. The Met sent me to her, so I was there from the time I was at the Met, and uh, I never felt that she was trying to become successful on my career. That's really important.
Hmm.
And then you have to look at who people teach. She taught Tatiana Troyanos. She taught
Troyanos, yeah.
Neil Shikoff. She teaches Susan Graham. So you look at people and you say, I would like to do that. I would like to be like that. I would like to sing that well consistently every day.
Well, just to take those four people, Tatiana Troyanos, Susan Graham, Neil Shikoff, and you, is there a commonality in terms of either the approach to the music or to the characters, to the performance style, to the technique?
Those people, I would say there was a seriousness of study and a seriousness of purpose and a wanting, Tatiana, Neil, a wanting to sing the entire piece well every time. There was a nervousness. Tatiana was like a racehorse in the paddock waiting to go with blinders on. There was that. Neil, every note, working on every note over and over, every note. There was that. Yeah.
Can that, for the artist, create anxiety and in some ways impede the performance?
It creates great anxiety, I think, but I think that the victory is when you have that anxiety and you don't impede the performance. I think the anxiety is something that's built into us. The nerves are almost necessary, but it never impeded the singing. Oh, Tatiana. Oh, could sing Handel one night and Strauss the next.
And
And,
then Wagner and
and then the
everything,
next. Everything. And then Verdi.
Verdi, yeah.
Yes. Everything. Everything. Yeah.
Um, I forget whether it is next Wednesday the 17th or Friday the 19th, but on one of those nights, I believe the 17th, the Metropolitan Opera is presenting on its live stream Cavaliere, Cavaliere Rusticana with Tatiana Troyanos, which once seen, never forgotten. I'll just point everyone who's watching to one moment uh, when she's excommunicated, and there's the character Santuzza is excommunicated, and there's a moment in the orchestra of the realization that this has happened and that Turidu, the man she loves, will be killed and all of that. And her body convulses, but it doesn't seem fake. And she's sort of blown back onto Zeffirelli's steps of the Sicilian church. And it's just shocking and dramatically perfect.
Yes.
And when I think of the great actors in opera, in addition to the great singers in opera, Tatiana Troyanos was right there. But that's a perfect analogy of like the racehorse in the paddock ready to get out. I dealt with her a lot and dealt with her nerves, and I'm not complaining. It was a privilege to do it. But there was such tension a lot of the times. In Tannhäuser, in the third act, when Venus had to sing from a high level and she was nervous about being up there, I stood on the stage behind her, holding the costume and holding her so that she could lean forward, which is what her character wanted her to do. Lean forward, but she was a tall, strong woman, and I was pulling her back.
Yes.
And at the moment that she'd finished her singing and the light went off, she would just collapse back into me.
Yes.
And the energy in that body as she sang that, and the sound standing right behind her, was quite phenomenal. Tell me more about Tatiana Troyanos,
Well,
because
there was something about you and I talked before this broadcast started about being a sideman. I felt like I was a sideman, and I loved that. Uh, um, and you explained it to Johann, who's taking care of us. Uh, but it's somebody who stands next to the star and adds what they have to make the performance complete. I loved taking care of Tatiana.
mm,
I loved making her feel taken care of, you know, because her art was so uh, enormous, magnificent. And it was all about the music. It was all about helping her give that art, in the Trojans, just her the statuesque quality of that character.
I was
Her
about to go there. One
oh
of the great experiences in my whole opera career was Les Troyennes at the Met, which opened the 1983 season, Berlioz's Les Troyennes. And James Levine conducted, and he adores Berlioz, as do I. And the Met does Les Troyennes every 10 years in a 3-year.
mhm.
So 03, 13, 23, 33, and so on, because it's a huge undertaking. And Berlioz was born in 1803. So that's why they do that. Since 1973, it was Vickers, Verrett, and Christa Ludwig in the original, Raphael Kubelik conducting. But then from 83, it was James Levine for many decades. And you were in that cast as Ascanius. And if I remember, Ascanius is the son of Aeneas.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, so very important character. And we had the debut of Jesse Norman as Cassandra. We had Domingo singing, I believe, his only Aeneas.
Yes.
We had Tatiana Troiano singing this extraordinary Didon Dido. And I will say that for everything going on in the beauty of the orchestra, my takeaway ultimately was Tatiana Troyanos' death scene as Dido, Je vais mourir. And the Trojans, in other words, you and Dad Domingo, Aeneas, went off to conquer Rome, and Dido realizes that she has sacrificed Carthage and her people and everything for her love for Aeneas. And when the orchestra swirls up like that and you hear Italy, Italy as you all sail off, and the trumpets blare and the stage just kind of opened up, and with hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people on the stage, in the middle, Tatiana Troiano's, the character dead, was more commanding, just her back dead, than everything. And it was quite extraordinary.
It was
You were,
extraordinary.
I was in the auditorium or backstage, but you were on the stage. Talk about everything happening in Les Troyens from
Oh,
your point of view.
oh, it was such a spectacle, and of course it was very long. It was two operas together. Such a huge spectacle, and the hugeness of the voices. Jessie, the hugeness of her art. Uh, uh, Tatiana, there was no one like Tatiana. Um, Placido, he used to come off the stage and you would say, "Oh, Placido, you're singing so well." And he would say, "It's going well, isn't it? It's going well." He cared about the entire production. Also, it was the first time we broadcast live to Europe.
I
So
know.
that broadcast, of course you know, that broadcast was going everywhere at once. And the enormity of that, it was just when you looked when you were downstage and I remember looking up to Jessie to bring her down. She was on Amsterdam Avenue. It
Yep.
was the entire stage. It was amazing. And I don't want to be remiss. Fabrizio Milano directed it, and it was a
Yep.
beautiful, beautiful production.
It was.
Ah,
Just so listeners understand, when you say that Jesse Norman was on Amsterdam Avenue, the Metropolitan Opera House stands on Lincoln Center Plaza, and the front of the building is on the plaza. It's the main central building on this complex of performing arts institutions. If you go straight through, let me put it first. If you were to stand the Metropolitan Opera House up, it would be 46 stories tall. So now let's lay it back down again. If you go through, you go down steps into the auditorium, and we talk in theater at the Met certainly about front of house and back of house. And in the auditorium, 3,786 seats, many tiers. Then there's the orchestra pit, and then there's the stage, the apron of the stage. That's the dividing line, and the curtain, the proscenium arch. What's behind the gold curtain is backstage. But if you keep going straight through, you have the main stage, which is 28 meters by 28 meters, 60 feet, 60 feet. You have platforms on either side of it where scenery can be rolled out and off. But then behind that main stage is another stage. And that one has a turntable on it, so that if scenery needs to be put on a turntable to move, it's mounted there and the platform is rolled in. If you go behind that, you have the loading dock and you have Amsterdam Avenue, where the trucks arrive and the scenery loads in the scenery. There are lifts, there are elevators to the left, 28 feet by 28 feet, so the scenery could be lowered down to storage below. And the Met does everything in repertory, so that you may have 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 different operas all running back and forth at the same time. So they lifted up a lot of the rear space for Les Troyens because the production was so huge. And that's why you said that Jessie Norman was on
oh,
Amsterdam Avenue.
up all these stairs, and there she was.
Yeah.
It was really remarkable. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the reason that I grimaced when you spoke about we're broadcasting live to Europe, because that was in part what I was involved in part. And do you know that we had a terrible technical glitch with the last 22 minutes of the performance?
I'm remembering that now.
In other words, the
Yeah,
death of Dido,
yeah.
just the summit of everything of the whole experience. And it went in and out, and I don't know ultimately what people in Europe saw, but when we were producing the broadcast version for North America, initially what happened was we asked Tatiana, would you redo the last scene of the opera so we can film it? She said, absolutely not. I'd have to do the whole opera again to reach my emotional peak to then do myself in. I can't just do the last scene again. And but she wasn't certain right away could she do it. So we were there until about 2 a.m, and we had told the cast and the chorus and everyone before she ultimately said, and I respect this, I can't do it. And so we had to do something that was never done before. We had to take footage from a rehearsal, broadcast rehearsal. It was a live performance. It was October 4th,
Mm-hmm.
but it had a line through it to indicate it was a rehearsal. So it was only in recent years that they've been able to clean that up enough that you can't really tell that
Mm-hmm.
we attached 22 minutes from an older performance. Uh, because that night, we were literally going live, and uh, anything and everything could happen. And it did. You all on the stage were great. We had problems.
Well, I am on one of those rehearsal recordings of Idomeneo, just in case something went wrong with the broadcast.
Yeah.
And my recording, of course, has the line going through it.
Well,
But
let's
that
talk about Idomeneo, unless there's more to cover on La Troyenne. Idomeneo was done by the Met in 1982 for the first time. It's a wonderful production by Jean-Pierre Ponel, a fantastic production. And Luciano Pavarotti did a very rare foray into Mozart. And Federico von Stade, who was my guest here on January 1st, which viewers can watch on YouTube on the Adagio page. Ileana Kotrubash, Hildegard Behrens, you, an extraordinary gathering of people. And on the opening, Ms. von Stade had to cancel during the opera. And who had to jump in?
it, it, it was one of those unexpected evenings. She had done what we call warned. She had warned me that she wasn't feeling so well, and then she took herself off warning. She said, "I'm fine. I'm going to be fine." So I remember it was one of those nights I had chili and beer for dinner, and I was sitting in the artist box with Benita, and she came out and she was sick, and you could tell she was sick. And of course, you sing. And Idamante sings most of the hard stuff right at the get go. So I thought, well, if she gets through this act, she's gonna sing it. And the door opened, and it was Florence Guarino, and she went like this to me.
Explain Florence Corino to those who don't know.
Florence Guarino was a wonderful, wonderful administrator at the Metropolitan Opera for many, many years, and she took care of us. That's simply the way I can. She took care of the artists, and she loved me and was good to me. But she called me out into the hall and she said, "This is it." She said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "Yes. I need a cup of tea. I need a score, and I need my teacher." who came down to the Met and vocalized me. I needed her to hold my hand. But it was a very exciting time for me. I had never met Pavarotti, and I met him on the stage. He was my father, and there we were. Uh, um,
Let's explain that Idamonte is a young man.
yes,
And basically, the gods have saved King Idomeneo from drowning at sea. He's been saved by, I guess, Neptuno. And but there's something like either the first hand he shakes or the first person he looks at
the first
has
person he sees
he sees, okay,
gets sacrificed.
has to be sacrificed, and that turns out to be his son Idamante.
Yes, yes.
Now, Pavarotti, I don't know if you know this, early in his career, sang Idamante
I
when the
think
role was given to tenors.
I think it's a great tenor role. I think it's a problematic mezzo role. Flicka and I had to work very hard to sing it. Both of us. She sang it great.
Yeah.
She played a trick on me, which is why I kind of wanted to tell you this. But whoever's turn it was to sing it, uh, the other person really prayed for them because we didn't want to do another one. And one night she said she was just fine, and I said, okay, I'm gonna have people for dinner, and I live only a few blocks from the Met, so I could that's how I covered, and then I went there if I needed to. And I was cooking in the kitchen, and I had the pasta and the chicken, and the table was set. And I get a message on my answering machine, and I'm not answering the phone. I get a message, and the message is Flicka, and she says, oh, Claudia, I'm so sorry. I'm in my dressing room. I'm really not feeling well. And at that moment, I was going to have a heart attack. And then she just couldn't pull it off, and she started to laugh, and she never mind. I hate you that you're having dinner. But it was so sweet and so cute. Such a wonderful colleague, a wonderful,
Oh
wonderful.
yeah. I mean, I hope that everyone will go look at my conversation with her.
Oh,
It's
it's terrific. It's
memorable.
just terrific.
Um, so talk about Luciano. Well, anyone in the cast actually, but talk about Luciano Pavarotti for starters. He and I were very close friends. You know that I always say that we are all colleagues, but there are a few people we also have who become friends, like you and Benita.
Yes.
Luciano and I were very, very close friends for 29 years. And so I knew him actually in Italy before I came to work at the Met. He was already singing at the Met, of course. And what were your experiences with him like?
Well, being on the stage with him, being close to his face, to his body, was a voice lesson. I never saw anyone do it exactly the way people teach to do it, that you want to do it. And he was always working on that. I think he was, by the time I sang with him, he was nervous. He was the king of the high seas, and he knew that that's what the audience was expecting. And it was nerve wracking for him. He also was such a lovely human being. We were in rehearsals, and it was after lunch, and we were waiting and we were waiting and Luciano wasn't there, and he came flying through the door, and he had discovered Dunkin' Donuts. And it was like he was the first guy ever to discover Dunkin' Donuts, and there he was carrying boxes of them. And it was just absolutely, he was absolutely adorable, just adorable. Um, Louisa Miller, I remember he arrived very late, maybe the dress rehearsal. And Leo Nucci was trying to help him. And of course, it was in Italian. And Leo was saying, when you go here, I go here, when you go here. And he said, don't worry about me. He said, I am too nervous to know anything but to just sing this. And of course, he sang it great, but yeah, that was.
When you talk about doing it right vocally and technically, explain that more.
Well, I have a memory of his face and the width of his face and the way the sound would vibrate and the way he dealt with the tenor passaggio, the way he honed the notes in the passaggio in before he opened up again. It was all magnificent. It was like watching a voice lesson. He was just incredible. I wrote down one thing, and oh, ah, when I first went to sing at the Met, there were no guards. There was no. It was home. You walked through the back door, and you were home. And you could go to any rehearsal you wanted, and you could walk into the house and sit in the back, and great things were going on the stage. I remember going and sitting in the back of the opera house. I was the only person there, and it was a rehearsal of, it was in the break of a rehearsal of Tosca, and the curtain was down, and he was in front of the curtain in his costume singing E lucevan le stelle with Jimmy conducting the orchestra. I will never forget it. and crafting it and singing it over and over and stopping here and stopping there, and Jimmy working with him. It was sensational. Yeah.
It's true. I had to know every production for my work at the Met, but I had to know the productions as opposed to knowing the operas.
Yes.
But I wanted to know the operas, obviously the standard repertory I knew, but James Levine gave me free run of the place to attend rehearsals, unless with the rare exception of someone working a role and needing privacy. I certainly get that. But he understood that I was very serious about wanting to become expert in the repertory, not just the productions.
Yes.
And so I was allowed to watch him work and other conductors work with singers, and how what's on the page in terms of the notes and the words is a wonderful beginning, but he was a wonderful coach in terms of, and I use the word coach the way you did, not teacher in this case,
Mhm.
in terms of shaping the character and shaping the way each artist presented her version of the same character.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that was very important. And he knew
Yes.
enough about each voice and temperament to be able to do that.
He could just uh um he could say a little thing here, a little thing there, and make you sound better. He just had that way. And the only thing, the way I can say it is he made space around the music for the singer to sing. You felt wrapped in the music, totally taken care of. For me, it was an extraordinary experience to work with Jimmy. He was all about the music, and that's how I remember it. Batya Godfrey always says, "Remember Jimmy? He never yelled. He was so kind. He never yelled at anybody. He never made you feel bad publicly. He was so kind because all he wanted was the music." I consider myself very lucky. Yeah.
When people have asked me, I've said this in other contexts, in my experience in working in opera and in classical music to some degree, there were three conductors above all who influenced my view of the music and also the professionalism, how we work in this field. The first was Leonard Bernstein when I was a little kid, and
Mhm.
I was part of his focus group for the young people's concerts.
Yeah.
That there were 8 or 9 of us kids who he would bring into rehearsals and test what we responded to, what we didn't respond to,
Mhm.
if he was trying to explain a concept. And so, using us, he formulated his young people's concerts. Then, in my La Scala years, and also because I revered Claudio Abbado, to me, Abbado was, in a way, a summit of everything. And I don't want to say the best, but many magnificent nights of performance, but also approach that he had to the music and to his art form. And then James Levine, certainly in that trio, but what he was very particular about, and in a good way, was, I would call it, democracy, and that we all were there for the music. And while certainly he was the leader, Abbado was this way too. Um, he was the first among equals, and he didn't demand much. Um, I think we came to know that we had to behave in a certain way and that we had to be respectful of timing. People like me who had to administer many union employees, I knew that time was important and that we couldn't waste time and so on. But it was always about the music. But you also mentioned something. I think it's important we go back to it at the beginning of our conversation about um, Met Family, but
Oh,
also the group of contract artists, the core,
the plan artists.
the
Yes.
plan artists, because certain companies in Europe still maintain that to some degree,
Hmm.
where the people are civil servants in Vienna, in Munich, in Berlin, and so forth. And they function as part of that, but they also become known to and beloved by audiences.
Yes.
And we look forward to seeing, I'll name one name from our era, Andrea Velis,
Oh,
who was a character
oh,
tenor, and he might play the fool in Boris Godunov or one of the servants in Le Comte of Man. But it was Andrea Velis,
yes.
and he would be in a small role in Tosca, but it was Andrea Velis. And there's an artist in San Francisco who the audiences here love, Catherine Cook, the
Oh, yes. Oh,
mezzo-soprano, and
yes,
she's fantastic.
yes, yes.
And whenever I go to San Francisco and attend the opera there, I look forward that Catherine Cook will be in one of the performances, not just because she's great, but the way the audiences respond to her. And family, in terms of a performing arts institution, is yes, the people who work in it, but also the audience, because without the audience, there is no performing arts institution. And audience members told me all the time that they felt connected to the Met because they were happy to see the Jean Crafts. So,
Yes.
for example, in Othello, when Jean Craft played Amelia in the last act, you knew you were getting an Amelia for the ages because she was so good at it. And your Suzuki, there's a recent artist, Maria Zivchak, who
Yes,
mezzo
of course.
soprano. There's
Yes.
that same feeling in Suzuki or whatever she plays. We're so glad to see Maria Zivchak.
Yes.
But Richard Bernstein is another current artist
Yes.
like that at the Met.
Yes.
But I find it very unfortunate for all kinds of reasons. You mentioned that when the plan artist concept ended, that it fell to young artists to take over the roles, and it's a controversial thing because yes, they need training, yes, they need to start somewhere. You began that way as a young artist, and you did 9 different roles in 9 different operas in the first 10 months at the Met. But how do we balance the two things of preserving the cohesion of a company, but also bringing up the next generation of opera performers?
Well, I'm not sure. I know that the plan artists, my concept of the plan artists was that we really learned our crafts before we went to the Met. So I had already done Suzuki many times before I went to the Met. So I had something to bring to the table. I think that's important, and I think it's far less stressful. These young artists are being thrown on the stage and have not really honed their crafts. I think in our particular opera company, we can help them do that. They can uh, be a young plan artist group and cover the. But the problem was, Fred, that we got too expensive. It was a business. It was a matter of business, and we had contracts that every year the contract was magnificent, and every year we got a raise, and we had all kinds of perks and all kinds of benefits. And I think that the Met wanted to change their focus of money to different things, and that's kind of what happened. It was horrible. It was it was a sad, horrible exit. Uh, but I wanted to talk about the family a minute before I go
Mm-hmm.
back to the exit. That family, we really took care of each other in a professional way that I don't know if it happens that way today. Patricia Craig is a very close friend of mine. She was a little farther along than me, and I never picked up a check for dinner. She paid for dinner. The first 3 years I knew her, she paid for dinner every night. It's that kind of thing. Betsy Norden, when we all left the Met, Betsy is so wonderful. Um, she took me to a Broadway agent. who proceeded to give me a Broadway career. I would not have had that career if it weren't for Betsy. James Morris, the greatest singer of my generation,
Mhm.
took me to the Baltimore Lyric Opera. And they hired me and they took care of me for the first 10 years of my career because of Jim Morris. Batya Godfrey, I always laugh. She drove me home. Oh, every performance we had, Batya Godfrey drove me home. Her children were toddlers. Her daughter is now my student and a great, great singer, a cantor in Chicago, Shira Ben David, a great cabaret singer. So uh, it was a family in that sense, in that regard. I don't think it is that way today. It is my guess that it is not. And when we had to leave the Met, us plan artists, um, uh, I decided I would tell you this story because the public doesn't know some of the goings on. We the way we left because they wanted us to leave was to be called on the stage to sing for Jimmy after working for Jimmy for a long time. And we did a stage audition. Then AGMA protected us so that we received a form letter that said, your voice has deteriorated. It is no longer big enough to sing in the house. And we are offering you 2.5 years of more of a contract, of a paid contract. And then you are no longer, and it was a cover contract basically. And then you will no longer be at the Metropolitan Opera.
Mm.
And it was all of us guys. And so one day we were singing, and the next day we were not. I never wanted to be a star. I never wanted my name in lights. I just wanted to be what the plan artists were. So it forced a lot of us to have new careers and to turn the page and to do other things. I went back to Broadway, and then I found a teaching career, which is very gratifying. Um, and I and I have to uh, um, I would be remiss if I didn't say the Manhattan School of Music, the music theater program, a great program. Thank you, James Gondry, who is the president of the school, and Liza Gennaro, who is the head of the program. It is a fantastic program. We prepare people to go to Broadway, and Broadway will be back. It will come back. Uh, but that moment at the Met was not fun.
Mhm.
That was a rugged, rough moment, and it has taken me. I left the Met in
89.
1989. Yeah, well, it's taken me all these years to be able to say it to you.
Yeah.
It's so unbelievable and so embarrassing. It took me 15 years to go back to the Met, and I went back because such a fan of Flores, and I wanted to hear him sing, and
Yeah.
I bought a ticket and I went back.
Juan Diego Flores.
Yes, yes.
Um, I want to go back. I have a Patricia Craig story that I haven't thought about for a long time. Um, when Ava Martone sang her first Met Tosca, Patricia Craig was the cover.
Yes.
And Ava Martone is a marvelous artist, but she's a handful. She's Hungarian. There's a lot of paprika and a lot of passion in Ava Martone. And Ava Martone sang the second act of Tosca. She sang Vici d'Arte. She was not content with how well she sang it for her Met premiere and was concerned about the reviews, perhaps, and how it would be received by the public. She was great. It was not that she sang it badly, but she didn't like how she sang. And then in the fight scene with Scarpia, she claimed that she was hit in the jaw by the baritone singing Scarpia and that she dislocated her jaw. And therefore, she didn't know if she can go on and do the third act. And as it happened, I had at the time a very good friend who was an oral maxillofacial surgeon. He was in the theater. He was fluent in Hungarian. So I got him out of the seat and I said, Andre, come backstage. Um, Ava Martone says that she's dislocated her jaw. Would you look at it? And in the meantime, I called Patricia Craig and I said, Patty, you may need to be at the ready just in case. And she said, okay. And she was very chipper and ready. And she came backstage. And I, in the meantime, was in Martone's dressing room, S10, I think, with S8, with Martone and with my oral maxillofacial friend. They were speaking in Hungarian, and she was, lamenting and so on, going on and on and on. And Andre said to me, she's fine. There's nothing wrong with her whatsoever. And she's, she said, I don't know if I can do it. I can do it. And he said to her in Hungarian, you're fine. I promise you. And they spoke very affectionate Hungarian. And then Patricia Craig arrived at the door and said, Fred, are you looking for me? And Martone stood up and said, I will sing, but you have to make an announcement. So we made an announcement, in effect, that Miss Martone, although she took a blow and was seen by an oral maxillofacial surgeon who was present in the theater, has agreed to continue. So the next day on the front page of the New York Times, singer recovers from broken jaw to sing third act of Tosca. Huge success. And Patricia Craig said to me, I'm glad to help.
She is the nicest person in the business. The nicest, and so much fun. I just have one story I have to tell you. She sang First Lady. We did the Magic Flute together at the Met with Isola Jones. The three of us, we had the best time ever, ever, ever. But Pat had that line, First Lady, where she gives the flute to Tamino, and she says in German, "Here is the magic flute. Here is die Zauberflöte." And when it was time to do it, she couldn't remember the word for magic flute. And Stuart Burroughs died. He had to turn up stage and just wept with laughter. And so that's one of my favorite Pat stories. But the other story is really, I went to Billy Budd, and Richard Castley was singing Vere. I think he was one of the great singing actors of my generation. I think he was a phenomenon. And I was watching this, and I had no idea who he was. And in the intermission, I went downstairs to the payphones because we didn't have cell phones then, and I called Pat. And I said, Pat, I'm at Billy Budd, and I'm watching this man, and he is fantastic. And of course, 10 years later, she married him.
Yeah.
So that's one of my Pat stories.
So I know the audience can see you now. I'm going to step away just for a moment to take care of something here. But tell us about your Broadway career.
Oh my heavens. Okay. Uh, um, Broadway was my first love when I was a kid. I had these recordings of Broadway shows and I played them over and over and over again. Uh, uh, then I realized as a young singer in New York that you weren't going to sing opera right away. So I decided to do summer stock and I did Fiddler on the Roof. I did it for many years. First with Theodore Bikel. It was a traveling company, first with Theodore Bikel, then with Jan Pierce, who whose family became my family, with Robert Merrill, and with Zero Mostel. So
Mm.
that was quite a journey. I was invited to go to Broadway at the time. Jan Pierce invited me to go. I didn't want to go. I wanted to sing opera. And he was furious, and I wouldn't go. Um, and then I did start to sing opera. Then years later, um, when when we left the Met, I went back to music theater. I did a tour of The King and I with Stacy Keach that was magnificent. I was hoping it would go back to Broadway, but Stacy didn't want to be compared with Yulbrunner, so we didn't go.
Uh,
And then I went to Broadway with The Most Happy Fella, which was a very interesting production because the director um, wanted to have a production that was like a play with music. So it was two pianos. There was no orchestra. We took our curtain calls in silence. We were nominated for a Tony. It was a rare happening. When it was over, I was kind of done. It's very fulfilling to be on Broadway. You're on stage every night. You have the gratification of creating the character. You get the applause every night, and I was sated.
mhm.
So I have a friend who got me a job at Goldman Sachs,
Oh,
and
really?
for 2 years I taught the investment bankers communication skills,
Huh.
and it was a lark. And I thought, well, I'm liking teaching. This is fun. So why don't I teach what I know? So that's when I started to teach, and I started first at Boston University, and a man named Roger Croucher asked me to teach in the theater department. He was the head of the theater department. He was also, at some point in his earlier career, the head of Lambda. He's English. And I fell in love with actors. Their risk and their ability to do anything. If you say to an actor, stand on your head, you're going to be a better singer, that actor's on his head. So it was a different kind of resistance. And I loved it. And that started the career that I do now. And I teach many actors.
We were talking earlier about the difference, let's say, between a teacher and a coach. And I was going to say to you that I've done a fair amount of coaching in the theatrical side for opera singers,
Yes.
because I think one can coach musical elements, but you have to have the preparation for that. And I don't. I know music, but I'm not at that level where I would ever say that I could, apart from a couple of little hints, coach an opera singer on the musical aspects of the theatrical performance. But the interpretive side, whether it's understanding the character, whether it's the usage of the words, is something that I'm very at home with.
Yes.
And I'm going to make a generalization, and you can disagree with me if you wish, of course, that younger people, which is to say, young people now, connect differently with the characters than people that you and I might have coached 20 years ago
Oh,
because of the change in mores, because of, let's call it, political correctness. Um, I think also the fact that, and this is a good thing, that because in many ways society is looser, freer, less judgmental in certain ways, less constrained by certain values, um, that they don't feel the edge, the roughness in a certain character and his or her behavior. But on the other hand, this lack of feeling the edge and the roughness means that they don't get the characters at all, and their performances are less interesting. How do you deal with that, saying when you're coaching a young artist in a role and she's not getting it emotionally?
uh, uh, um, I really go down to the bottom of the soul. I go down to the whys. Why did you say that? Where are you? Uh, who was your mother? Who was your father? Uh, um, what what did they do to you when you were growing up? Underneath and underneath and underneath, and I think that's very important. Um, I don't coach many opera singers. Well, I do. That's kind of a lie. I do in the summers. I don't coach many opera singers, but uh, um, kids today want to have it immediately, and that's a problem. And to help them to understand that where they're going takes time, takes life. You have to live. You know, I can say to the kids who are seniors, you are so much better than when you were freshmen. You have lived 4 years. You've been through a lot of stuff in these 4 years, and they have more and more to bring to the character. It's a really hard road now. It's a much harder road than when I was singing. Um, and I would like to help them. I would like to help light a fire under them and take away the desperation. If they're desperate, they're not going to work anyway. I mean, now, look at it now. Uh, um,
With the
so,
pandemic, yeah.
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 Um, I tried to help them to know that what they have is good enough. They are good enough the way they are, but they have to live, and also they have to be willing to do whatever it takes until it happens.
Hmm.
Jan Pierce used to say, "If you don't give up, you make it," and I think that that's part of it.
Okay,
This,
but I agree with you and Jan Pierce, but here's a quandary. Um, there was someone in the theater, not in opera, that I worked with and admired greatly, and he had many gifts, and he was good looking, not gorgeous, but good looking and presentable, and had good stage deportment and a nice speaking voice and a nice personality. But he kept trying and never quite getting work. And he was in his late 40s and not getting work and still, quote, going out on calls. And it was kind of clear to me, and not just to me, but a lot of people who really liked this guy, that he was not going to make it because there was nothing, there was no edge, there was no fire. He was presentable and likable. But it was, no one could quite tell him
uh,
and not want to hurt him. And we all hoped and prayed that he would figure it out for himself. And he eventually did.
yeah.
But we always thought that wouldn't it be nice if this guy could just leave sooner so that he could do something very secure for him and build a life for himself that was not based on postponing hope and postponing achievement. Um, I know certain artists who become teachers who are very blunt with young people and say you don't have it, or don't even bother. I couldn't bring myself to do that because I could be wrong. And I, at the beginning of my career, had a professor say to me that, quote, you have no future in the performing arts. And it annoyed me for about a week. And then I decided, well, he's wrong. And I'm going to keep at it. But I also realized that if he said that to other people, he may have stopped them in their tracks.
Yeah. Uh,
And
I never say it. I never say it. If somebody says to me, "Can I do it?" my answer always is, "Why not?" It's a question. I didn't say yes, but why not? And then I had a very wonderful, wonderful teacher, psychoanalyst, for many, many years, Claire Ernsberger. She's passed now. She used to say, "It's all resistance." And what we do is we hold that resistance in the palm of our hands until the person gives it up. And so I do that. And I'm very careful to do that. Because I think when you are mean to a kid in academia, when you fail them or tell them they can't do it, it's like shooting Bambi.
mm-hmm.
We are in the position to destroy. So we either help them create or we destroy. And it's a very tenuous line, But I think that it is our job, it's my job as a teacher to say, you can do it. And then if the kid can't do it, they'll figure that out. It's painful to wait in that process because some kids are not going to do it. But it's far more important and valuable for them to figure it out.
There's another way of saying that I've heard certain teachers and coaches use. And from now on, I'm always going to say teacher or coach and not blend them. They say, if you can imagine yourself doing any other thing instead of singing, acting, dancing, whatever the art form is, do it.
Yes, by all means, go do it.
Go
By
do
all
that.
means. If you love anything as much as you love this, by all means. But then I also send them to watch the movie The Turning Point with Anne
And
Bancroft.
Bancroft and Shirley MacLaine, yeah.
And Shirley MacLaine says, was it worth it? And Anne Bancroft, who is a ballet dancer, she has never been married, she doesn't have children, she has these little dogs with her. She says, well, there are moments when everything comes together and it's worth it.
Yeah, it's quite a line. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, um, uh, I love teaching. I'm not sure my job is really to tell kids how to do it, although I do. But I think my job is to light a fire under them so that they want to do it and want to find the way for them to do it. And I like to think that that's when you said in the beginning, about what you wanted from me. I think that's what I want at this point in my life. You know, I'll tell you a story. I see Marlena every day. We have dinner every night. We are the pandemic twins. So when I
You're
get
a pod.
I take off my coat and I wash my hands in the kitchen sink. And I have decided to regale her with my great repertoire of songs, mostly spirituals. I wash my hands to Deep River, whatever it is. And say to her, I went into the living room and I said, I can still sing. She said, yes, you can. I said, and there's no wobble. And she said, well. But she was very helpful to say to me, in 2010, I went to the St. Louis Muni to do Titanic. And I took some lessons. And I said, what do I sound like? And she said, oh, you sound like you. And I thought, oh, that's good. And then I went home and I thought, she didn't say you sound great. She didn't say you should still be doing it. She didn't say call your agent. And what she has always said to me is, know when it's time to turn the page. And I did. And I like to think I help kids to know that, because some of them need to turn the page sooner than others. But she didn't say turn the page. I figured that out. And that's what I want from kids. They have to own their souls. It's hard today to go to the Met and own your soul, because I don't think there's anybody really taking care of you. We had all of you. We had everybody taking care of us.
The Met website for many years, when the internet became a thing, was metfamily.org.
Oh.
And in recent years, it was changed to metopera.org. And I noted that, because I'm not here to tear apart the Met now, because I adore the Met. But it has changed through the decades.
Yeah.
And when I was on with Frederica von Stade, we spoke about the Met. It's not to say that things were better then. Some things were, some things were not. But the way it functioned as a family,
yeah,
genuinely so, there was that spirit.
Oh, yeah.
That was very particular. as I said, I've worked a lot at La Scala and other theaters, but La Scala is the other one I know, and the Lyric Opera of Chicago to some degree. And they too have that feeling, but it's a different kind of family.
Oh yeah.
It's a family where not everyone gets along, but it's a family. With the Met, there was just this commonness of commonality of purpose and focus, no matter if the general manager was Mr. Bing, Rudolph Bing, whether it was Anthony Bliss who hired me, whether it was Bruce Crawford, Joe Volpe. Um, we now have Peter Gill, but I would say to the beginnings of the Volpe era, there was this cohesion of
Oh yeah.
family. Joe came out of that.
Yes.
And so it was, but the artist also experienced it. And
Well,
not just the plan artists such as
right.
yourself,
Oh yes.
but Luciano and Placido and Regina Resnick,
Oh,
who started with the company in the 40s. And I worked her last show. And she and I, after the fact, became very close friends and did a lot of work together on the road, so to speak. And actually at sea, we did a couple of opera seminar symposia on cruise ships.
yes.
And we once had young artists from the San Francisco Opera in the Caribbean. It's very funny to say that, with Regina and myself as their coaches. And we did coaching and teaching, in the case of Regina, in front of the passengers. And then we'd have
Oh, that's
performance.
great. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've done this with Marilyn Horn on two occasions, Martina Arroyo. That's a wonderful way for people to bring that to see. But I remember Regina said to me, San Francisco Opera is a great company with the Maryland program and its history, but it's not the Met family.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was just different. The Metropolitan Opera also had and has the National Council program where they develop young artists. It's sort of the the biggest competition in America to become a winner of the Met Finals. And people like Renee Fleming and Susan Graham and Deborah Voigt, and a lot of these people won it. And then famous artists such as Joyce DiDonato did not and went on to have great
Yeah.
careers.
Yeah.
And but there were people who volunteered from all around the United States for the National Council program. And there was a woman, she was from somewhere in the US South, named Patter Gimber.
Oh yes. Of course, Patter Gimber.
Talk about
Yes.
Patter Gimber.
She's Pat Craig's time, Patter Gimber.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk about Patter Gimber. Do you
I don't.
remember
I
any?
didn't know her. I didn't know her at all. I just know the
Okay.
name, but I just remember Pat talking about her. But I want to say something to you. One of the
Yeah.
things that made us a family was the Met tour.
Yes.
And there was nothing like the Met tour. There was nothing like traveling together. And we always traveled on two separate planes. Flicka couldn't remember. It was Braniff. We traveled on
Uh,
Braniff. And I remember the planes were blue, which just was so weird to me. And it was because if one plane went down, we still had a company, you know. We traveled on those two planes. There was one moment where we were going somewhere and we all had to travel on the same plane. It was a huge plane. And they met us at the door of the plane as we were getting on with cocktails, with many cocktails, because everybody was a little bit nervous. We were a little bit scared. But those tours were wonderful, and we were wined and dined and taken to dinners, and we stayed in motels where there were swimming pools, and we all went swimming together, and we all went shopping together, and you become a family. We
yeah.
were a family. We were all best friends. So then,
Um, I've mentioned that because I was responsible for the Opera House when all of you got to go on tour, felt that my experience and my knowledge would not be complete if I didn't get to go on a tour. So I went on the last tour in 1986. And there was sadness because we all knew it was the last tour, but in a way there was a kind of freedom and an abandon. But opera was changing by then. There was a lot more broadcasting and television, and touring was expensive. And many of these cities, such as Atlanta and Dallas and Minneapolis, had their own companies.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
while they certainly welcomed the Met,
mhm.
they didn't, quote, need the Met in the same way.
Yeah.
Cleveland, Boston didn't
Mhm.
have as much opera.
Yeah.
But I want to take it back to Pater Gimber. Pater Gimber became like the den mother for every young finalist, and about 24 would come to New York, and then half of them would be winnowed out, and about a dozen would go into the final concert and the judging and so forth.
Mhm, mhm.
And what Patter was so good at was she would take care of the people who didn't win. She
Uh-huh.
made it her job not to congratulate the Susan Grahams and the Angela Meads, but to look after the emotions and the feelings of the ones who didn't quite make it. They got all the way to New York, but then didn't make it. And that was the family element that struck me
Yes.
so much.
Yes,
Because
yes,
many
yes.
of these people who did not win eventually got to perform in opera, some of them at the Met. And she, in her way, would call up a company and say, in Mississippi, and say, I have this wonderful soprano for you, and she'd be just right. And she was like an artist placement agency,
Yeah,
and she was a volunteer. She was not a paid person,
yeah.
but she did this out of love, and the sense of love for the art form and this connection also to the Met through radio
You,
was very,
you
very distinct.
you probably know this, but maybe you don't. A secretary at that time who took care of the contestants uh, um, was Rita Shane.
The soprano.
Yes,
Yeah.
who later went on to be the greatest queen of the night ever.
Yeah.
And Benita always says she remembers Rita taking care of her in the Met competition. And yeah, Pat, when Pat was in the Met finals, she was there with Jesse. They were in the finals together. Uh, um, and that's the way I know Pat Gimber's name from Pat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the connection.
So talk about your, you've taught, I think you told me, for 23 consecutive years in Lucca in
Oh,
Italy, because I gave you some restaurant tips in Lucca.
you
Talk
did.
about that aspect of your life.
Well, it was a fluke. It happened on a fluke. The University of Cincinnati had a program. They had just started it. It was their second year in Lucca. There was a man named Lorenzo Malfatti who taught in Pittsburgh and was from Lucca, so he founded this company. And a man named Malcolm Frazier, who was the opera director at CCM, called me and said, no. Larry called me and said, will you send your students to Lucca? And I said, well, no, because I teach my students in the summer and I need my own income and I will not. Um, and a couple, yeah, that's who I am, politically incorrect. But a couple days later,
Oh, but that's
uh,
smart.
a couple days later, Malcolm Frazier called me and he said, would you like to come to Lucca and bring your students? And that's how it started. And for 10 years, I taught for the University of Cincinnati in Lucca. Just a little sideline. I taught with a man named David Adams, who I first met in Barga in 1973, where we started our careers doing uh, The Barber of Seville and
So for listeners, Barga is a small town up in the
in the
Lucca
hills above.
Mountains in the Apennines,
And,
in the province of Lucca.
and the director was Italo Tayo,
Ah,
who really became my family. So that's how I first got to Lucca. But then uh, I said yes, and I started bringing my students for 10 years. We did it. During that time, Wichita State started their own program in Florence. Things weren't working out so well for them in Florence, and Cincinnati was their program had run its course, and there's the Istituto di Boccherini in Lucca wanted to collaborate with an American school. The reason I knew it was that Paolo Moncini, who owns the hotel that I've always stayed in and is a friend, and this is the way things happen in the Italian culture. He put the institute in touch with me, and I put them in touch with Marie King and the University of Cincinnati. We then started a different program, and we have had that program. It's a gem. It also involved is a place called the Koine, which teaches Italian. So these kids come, 15 of them, 20 of them, they have Italian lessons every day. They have voice lessons every day. They have coachings every day. And they do opera scenes at the end of the summer. By the end of the summer, they speak Italian. And they get
And
the
how many weeks is the program?
5, maybe 6. By the time you get there and get acclimated, which is all part of it, they learn to live in a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the Italians are, as you know, they're very different from us, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that if a student wants to be an opera singer, they need to do that. They need to have that experience in a foreign country, in Italy. And of course, it's 40 minutes from Florence, so it's home for me. And last summer couldn't go. This
Because
summer,
of the pandemic.
yeah, this summer.
Um, Puccini was from Lucca,
Puccini is from Lucca. He was born.
and
He was
yeah,
born in Lucca. Yeah.
and he was the fifth of 7 children, and he was the prediletto, the preferred child. He had a lot of women around him,
Yes.
mother and aunt, and lots of sisters, and a brother followed him, and therefore he grew up surrounded by women. And I always thought to myself that part of his insight in terms of writing women characters was the fact that he really grew up in, as the Italians would say, un ambiente di femmine,
Yes.
and they they shaped him. And when I visit any town where a composer lived, but also especially Lucca, I think about him all the time. He then moved nearby to Lago di Massaciucoli and Torre del Lago,
Yes.
the tower by the lake, and he built a villa there, and he lived there and wrote most of his operas there, apart from Turandot, which he wrote at Viareggio. And you feel him
Oh,
so
you do.
much.
Oh, you do.
Describe how you
Oh,
feel Puccini there, because it's very palpable.
when you walk the streets and they're the same cobblestones that he walked. It's a walled-in city, and the top of the wall is a garden where you can walk around, and he walked there. The same lights. The fact that everything, it really hasn't changed. There's his cafe is there, the ice cream place where he bought ice cream. He was born there. The family home is in a place called Celle dei Puccini. I'm sure you know that.
Mhm.
And that's where the family home, which is incredible. All it's not like we throw things away. All of the original things are still there. Um, I remember the first time standing in the cortile where his statue is, and listening to a concert of Puccini and looking up at the apartment window
Yeah,
where he was born, and I dissolved into
yeah,
tears.
yeah.
It's just, you feel the presence of the person. If you go to Torre del Lago, his hunting jackets are still hanging. And if you put your hand in the pocket of the hunting jacket, there's tobacco.
Yeah.
His tobacco is there. His letters that he wrote to his wife when he couldn't speak are in the apartment in Lucca. It's phenomenal. And
Just to
that
be clear, he couldn't speak because he had throat cancer because he smoked 90 cigarettes a day.
exactly,
And
exactly.
in Torre del Lago, his ashtrays are everywhere on the piano. Wherever you look in that home are ashtrays.
To tell you about the Italians, Paolo is in his 40s. He's a handsome young guy. He has a family, his mother, his father, his sister. And one day we were all in the hotel together. We were all in the lobby of the hotel, and they all sang "O mio babino caro" for me, all together, all correct. That's Italy.
It is Italy.
That's
Did you ever know Simonetta Puccini?
I met her. She was still around when we were doing the Cincinnati program, and she would come
Mhm.
to the performances. She had little dachshunds, and she would come with her dachshund. But I never I didn't know her.
I knew her. Let me tell listeners who Simonetta Puccini was. Puccini, in the most plain terms, slept around. He had a lot of women. His wife, Elvira, was married to someone else and he slept with her, and then he persuaded her to leave her husband to marry him. And then he promptly started sleeping around again and again and again. Um, I'm not endorsing that, but it's just a fact. And he had a son, Giacomo. I think I could be wrong, but he had a son and Antonio, and the son also slept around. And he produced a daughter out of his marriage, named not in his marriage, named Simonetta, who was born about 5 years after Puccini died, the grandfather, Giacomo Puccini. And so she never knew him. And because, and I hate the term, but she was considered illegitimate,
Right.
um, she was marginalized from the family and denied, as the only blood grandchild of Puccini, denied a lot of things that she should have come her way. And it was not just about the money, it was about the sense of protecting her grandfather's legacy. And then came World War II, and she lived on next to nothing. And her her birth father's real wife, legitimate wife, got everything when Puccini's son died. And then she shared it with her brother, and her brother then left it to his servant in Naples. It's really right out of Johnny Schicchi, except
Mm-hmm,
it was not a
mm-hmm,
comedy.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Simonetta spent most of her life fighting to reclaim the legacy, not just for financial purposes, but to put together the home in Torre del Lago that we know and to protect it
Mm-hmm.
from the relatives stealing everything out of the home and selling it as a Puccini artifact. And my teacher was Tito Gobi, and Tito Gobi is the one who introduced me to her. And he said to me in Italian, "Guarda, è tosta." Tosta. Tosta means she's a tough customer. She's not easy to deal with. But
Yes.
it's because she had dealt with so much in her life. And yes, she was not easy, but on the other hand, she had been wronged
But
and
in the end,
managed.
she won. Am I right? In
Yes,
the
but
end,
yeah, I was going to say
yeah,
very late in her life,
yeah.
managed to win and put all of it into a foundation for the continuation of Puccini studies. And she died 2 or 3 years ago. And I wrote an article that readers, listeners can find by um, just searching Fred Plotkin, Simonetta Puccini, and that should produce the article. But in which I remembered her and described her
Yes.
difficult life and the
Yeah.
conflict that she faced. Because really, I'm not joking. There was a manservant in Naples with 22 relatives who got most of the Puccini estate until Simonetta was able to win it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the fact that we have a Puccini home now in Torre del Lago, the Villa Puccini, where he's buried, by the way,
Oh
is
yes.
because of Simonetta.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but not an easy person to deal with because of everything she faced. So that's what I was wondering if you ever dealt with her. I think
No.
unfortunately a lot of people would just say, "Oh, I don't want to be with her because she's so difficult," but there was a reason.
No. But she would come and come to the performances and listen. We did a lot of our performances in a reconverted cloister where the nuns went in and never came out.
Yeah.
And we did a production of Suor Angelica in there
Wow.
that was just hair raising because it felt like you were really in it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful memories of Luca.
So listeners know that I always ask my guests to go into the Adagio catalog and find works that inspired them. And what I will say about your picks is that they're all classics with artists such as Jan Pierce and Leach Albanese and Risa Stevens and again Albanese and Pierce and Renata Scotto, Regina Resnick, Placido Domingo, Leontine Price, Renata Tebaldi, UC Bierling. These are all magnificent, and I was fortunate to work with a few of them, and cook with Leach Albanese, who taught me how to make meatballs. But it raises a question that they're all sort of a certain time frame.
I noticed that. I was thinking about that this morning. What's your question?
Is it that this is when your taste and experience was formed?
Yes.
Or was it something about the performance style of the time?
No, it was immediately I went back to my childhood. I went back to being 10 years old and to listening over and over and over to these recordings. And I say with all respect and love, I had a wonderful family that was also a dysfunctional family. And opera saved my life just listening to these recordings. But the thing that I wanted to say to you was, especially that recording of Carmen, that's Fritz Reiner, and it's Risa Stevens and Jan Pierce and Leach Albanese, and I think Robert Merrill. On the
Yes.
recording I have was Robert Merrill. I listened to that recording. I wore it out. That duet between Micaela and Don Jose, I wore it out. And then in my adult life, I knew them all.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something so amazing about that for me. You know,
True.
the sound. I am a Pierce fan, a real Jan Pierce fan. The sound of that voice, I just loved it. But
So
yes,
did
it was.
Toscanini.
Yes, yes. Although he wasn't originally meant to do that recording. It was Bierling, and Bierling wasn't going to do it. And fortunately, Pierce said yes. And after that, yes, absolutely. Uh, um, Pierce said a lot of things that were so influential for me. He said, "You know, I tenors are either lovers or warriors." He said, "And I'm a lover, and that's why I can still sing." And he sang well into his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, uh, um, the best Don Ottavio ever for me is Pierce. Um,
What makes him the best in that very difficult role?
the precision of his singing, and also the brashness of the sound that dramatically connected with the character. I felt that way when he did Butterfly. He really was Pinkerton, that brash American guy, and I felt that Albanese was fragile and young, and she was Cho-Cho-san. You know. But that's why it was. I went back to 10 years old when you asked me because
Mm-hmm.
you said who influenced you. Um, then later on, Miss Price influenced me, but I didn't really know her singing as a kid. But that YouTube clip of her last Aida at the Met
Mm-hmm.
with the ovation at the end. Whenever I want to see God, I play that clip.
One day I'm going to write this story, but I was in the wings for that, holding her hand. And I'm the person who took her off the stage at the end of her opera career and brought her backstage. I'll tell just a little bit of it. And Cardinal O'Connor, then the Cardinal in New York, had attended the performance. And Leontine was understandably completely full of emotion and dealing with everything. And all I did was hold her hand. She was clenching it very tightly. And we walked back to the dressing room area. She did not take the star soprano dressing room. She took the one at the end, all the way on the left. and we turned, and there was the cardinal and these men in black, and she turned to me and said, "Mr. Plotkin, I know that I retired, but I didn't know I died."
Oh, yeah. I'm a big tennis fan. To share this with you, and Arthur Ashe commented about how difficult it was for him to represent his sport and represent his race. And when I think of Miss Price, I think of how she did it in such a magnificent way, and she changed the world for every young artist of color today. What we owe her is really extraordinary. Uh, and being one of the greatest singers ever, ever. So, yeah.
She understands. I'm speaking the present tense because 2 days ago she turned 94.
Yes, yes.
She understands that she's a very important symbol, not just for African Americans, although of course for African Americans, for people of African descent, as Lawrence Brownlee corrected me to say. But she, in her career, was Black excellence, but also excellence.
Excellence.
Because
Yes.
by any standard, it's not because she was Black, just by any standard, the excellence, the extraordinariness, if we could use that word, was there.
Yes.
But she refers to her voice as the voice, as if it's something that was put in her, but also outside of her, and she's the custodian.
Yeah.
And it's a great gift, and as she always says, it's an honor. It's an honor.
Yes.
Her Mississippi R is different from my New York R, and it's an honor to have the voice. But she also, in my experience in my life, I've never known anyone with a better memory than Leontyne Price. And that ability means that she can meet people who she met 30 years before. I remember one time I was with her and a young man came up to her and said, "Miss Price." "Well, hi, darling. How are you?" African-American man. "I'm fine, Miss Price. Thank you." And he said, "I'm from Florida, and I heard you when I was about 8 years old." And she said, "I remember you told me you wanted to become a doctor. Did you?" And he was amazed, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm in medical school now." "Well, I'm proud of you," she said. Now, so interesting that one of the greatest singers of all time would turn it back and say, "I'm proud of you."
Yes. Yes.
That was an affirmation of him as a young African American, but as a man who lived his dreams and so on. But she did that with everyone. There was not a racial thing to it, although she understood her symbolic importance to people of color. But she did that with everyone.
Yes.
And she has a terrific sense of humor.
Oh my
So,
heavens. Although I love on her birthday, Facebook, everybody posts the memories that they have of her,
yeah,
and they're all so entertaining and charming. The
yeah.
things that she said and did. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Claudia, I actually have one more question for you I've never asked you. Um, where is your family from in Italy?
Oh, they're from Sicily. They're from Palermo and Messina. And the Messina part, I would really like to go back and see. I wear a medal from a church in Messina. I've never been to Sicily. I first knew about you when you started to post about how you did that cooking tour of Sicily,
Yes.
and I thought I have to meet this man. And the next time he goes to Sicily, I'm going with him. But I've never been. I've only been to the north of Italy.
My
So
eye doctor is from Sicily and he's never been. And I'm just amazed because when I went there, I went to his little hometown and I brought back capers from his town to give him. And he said, "Well, in my family, we've always cooked with capers, but we never went there. None of them went there. It was kind of like the people left with immigration a century ago and didn't want to go back or wouldn't go back. The reason I asked where in Italy you're from, I suspected Sicily. Your last name, Catania,
Catania.
is the second largest city in Sicily, but you're from nearby Messina and from Palermo.
Well, here's the story as they say it. Um, when the Jews came in to the Romance language speaking countries, they took the names of cities so that they could blend in with the culture. So Catania, of course, city in Sicily. I don't know what my background is. We can't. I don't know. But the first time I ever went into a synagogue for a job to sing, I opened the music and I knew it all. I knew it all. And I thought, this is something that's inside me that that I haven't learned. So I would love to go back and see what they did.
Well, many Italian Jews I've known through the years all have surnames of cities.
Yes.
I had a friend whose last name was Rimini, and she was
Right.
Jewish, and it's just a very particular thing. Italian and Jewish is one of the greatest combinations in the world.
It's it is. Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it
I
is.
mean, that's me, and it's I'm not saying I'm great, but just those two cultures together,
Yes,
the
absolutely.
parentage, the emphasis on food, on family, and so on, the craziness that can also lead to a certain kind of creativity.
Yes.
It's a wonderful experience.
All that.
So,
Oh,
Claudia, grazie. Thank you.
Prego. Thank
This
you.
has been a pleasure, and I commend my listeners here on Adagio around the world to learn more about Claudia Catania, who has done for many years and continues to do great work.
Thank you,
See you
Fred.
soon. Say hi to Marlena.
I will. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye bye.